All right, everybody. So, welcome back to the live stream. Now, for those of you that have been actually sort of watching for the last little while, there's a couple of things that you might be asking yourself. One is, why can't you see my face? And why do I have a setup that looks so ghetto behind me? Well, I will tell you why. Because I've actually, for the next couple of days, I'm actually going to be live streaming like this because I'm going to be doing something very cool this week that I haven't actually done in a very long time. But as a result of it, I've unfortunately had to screw with my studio a little bit because I didn't have quite as many XLR cables, so I had to tear temporarily my existing live stream setup apart. So I've actually taken one of the lights and put it over here, and then I have a different audio interface. So I'm not actually using the device that I typically use. And the reason for this is because I actually have to do some remote sessions Zoom. And I will get into that in a little bit. So those of you animation nerds kind of like me, whether you were an animator or not, probably grew up watching Dragon Ball Z and the original Dragon Ball and a whole bunch of classic anime. And Inuyasha is another good example, and many others. Now, the company responsible for the English dubs for the majority of these anime dubs that have aired in North America, or at least in English, is a company called Funimation. So any of you that grew up with Inuyasha, say, or Dragon Ball Z and watched it on Saturday morning, it's actually Funimation that is responsible for the dubs in English. So when you hear Richard Cox as Inuyasha, or you hear Chris Rager, God, there's a bit of a delay in my headphones here. So if you hear Chris Rager as Mr. Satan in Dragon Ball Z, that's actually all done through animation. So the majority of those dubs now are being done in Fort Worth, Texas. And a lot of the dubs, consequently, now are also being done through are being done remotely, right, because of COVID. So it's not realistic to go into the studio and do these sorts of things. So apologies to Chris. I'm just trying. I do know how to pronounce the names properly. I've just kind of set everything up, and there's a very slight echo in my headphones that I just have a little bit of window dressing and housekeeping that I have to do. And yeah, it's very annoying. That having been said, it's primarily made so that I can be heard without delay with Source Connect. And the slight echo that you might hear if you're listening to this on headphones or another device is just because I'm very close to the microphone and I have it set up so that I can hear myself, and there's a little bit of a loop. So that's something else for OBS that I'm just going to kind of work on. But it's obviously, again, designed for Zoom, so this is not really something that you're going to necessarily have to deal with. So there's a very slight half-second delay, and that's one of the reasons that I'm stuttering a bit, so I just have to kind of work on the bit rate. But I did want to do a live stream tonight just to kind of tell you a little bit and why everything looks so ghetto. Now, as of next week, everything will be back to normal, and I'm going to get some more XLR cables so that I can split everything. So right now, I can live stream through the device that I normally use, which is connected to my keyboards, so that you can kind of hear me play while I'm talking. I also have one set up with my main computer, which is what I use for the majority of my visual effects and production work, which we do Go and Nitro and our ad agency stuff on when I'm working from home. And then I have the laptop, and then I have a second laptop that I use when I am going to be doing a live stream on location. So all these different devices for all these different uses. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So before I go into what I'm doing, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. So some of you may know that I was trained as a classical animator. So basically the hand-drawn flip, flip, flip back at Disney. So I used to work at an animation studio in Ottawa called Amberwood. And I started there as a co-op, and then I went on to go to Sheridan College in Oakville out of Toronto. Didn't finish. I actually left after 2 years because there was a lot of work, and then I ended up getting into advertising, and then I worked at CTV, and I kind of bounced back and forth a bit. But the animation community is very small. Now, when I worked at Amberwood, there was a really awesome guy. Well, everybody worked with was awesome, but there was a guy that I worked with by the name of Gerald Tripp. And Gerald Tripp was a very accomplished voice director, or a very accomplished voice director for animation. So for those of you of a certain age that grew up in, say, for example, England or Canada or Germany, Gerald Tripp was the voice director for the Raccoons. So the Raccoons was a very popular animated program. And for those of you that don't know, there's a lot of animation that comes out of Canada. So I kind of went from the background of being a classical animator, but I also had done a fair amount of voice work, just sort of idents and those sorts of things, you know, what you would kind of hear in the days of sign-ons and sign-offs, which of course they don't do anymore. Now, when I worked at Amberwood, we all would sort of goof around while we were working, and that's sometimes how you get pulled in. And I was working on an animation, I'm trying to remember what I was working on. I think it might have been Zero Man. That was a cartoon that we did for the family no, that was for Teletoon, and it was Leslie Nielsen that did that. And basically I was working on the stuff. I think I might have still been a co-op student at the time, and I was making voices in the hall because it was a fairly slow day and I was goofing around, and I don't remember what voice it was. It might have been Cobra from G.I. Joe. So he has this sort of, "And I, Cobra, will get the Joe." There is an entire city of suckers. So it was just this kind of voice that I was doing. And I had made a couple of other silly voices like, "Oh, gee, I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do." Anyway, I was making these goofy voices and making some of the other animators laugh. And Gerald heard me. So I was quite young at the time. And of course, my instinct is that I was going to get in shit. And I was like, oh, great. I'm so fired. So Gerald pulls me into this room with Ron Black, who was my direct boss. He was the lead animation checker, so he was director of production. So he basically made sure that all the animation scenes were completed and done and ready for television. So Ron Black, really nice guy. But you know, he was a big man, so he was, you know, like he just towered over me. So he was always sitting at his desk, so it was easy to forget just how tall he was and his stature. So when he stood up, and that didn't happen very often. So I remember sitting down, and I'm staring down the barrel, so to speak, at Gerald Tripp, who was on the left-hand side, and Ron Black, who was sitting on the right-hand side. And Ron stands up, which I very rarely saw. So he's like, "Well, Corey, I think Gerald wants to talk to you." I'm like, oh, God. So Gerald, sorry, I've got my Siamese in the back who's also trying to provide her own running commentary. Anyway, so I'm sitting there just kind of dreading what's going to happen. So at the time, we were in pre-production on a show which I think is still running. It was called The Secret World of Benjamin Bear. And it was sort of a spin-off of the teddy bear picnic specials that we had done in the 80s, which was before my time, because when I was a kid, I was watching them. So Gerald looks at me and he says, Corey, I don't normally do this, but I don't know if you've given any thought to it, but you have very good vocal control. And I know that you're doing animation, but if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of give you a crack and audition and see if you want to do this character and maybe do some sides in the interim, but I think this is something that you could do. And the pay was pretty good. It's actually fairly similar to what it is now. So at the time, if it was a lot of the stuff was union, but not everything. So generally, if you did a recording session for an animated special or an animated show, you generally have roughly a 3-hour session, and depended on how many lines that you had. So Gerald said, and I was like, well, gee, I don't know. Like, I'm not really a voice person. And Gerald's like, you know what, Corey, I think you could be great. Just humor me and try it. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But I think you'd be great. So at the very least, do some sides for me. Can you do that for me, Corey? I'm like, you know what, Gerald? All right. I think I can manage that. So he was like, okay, do you think you can do an old man voice? And I said, yeah, I think I can probably do that. And I knew the character that he was talking about because Chris Shoughton, who is the character designer, he was working on the characters for this show. So he was a character designer at Amberwood for the majority of the shows, if not all of them, that we were working on at the time. And there was a character named Edgar Bigglebore. Now, I don't know if Gerald remembers this. He probably does. He has a memory like a steel trap. Anyway, so he said, all right, so this is Edgar Bigglebore. You've already seen the storyboards. You already know more or less what the character is. They were still working on the scripts at the time, right? Because everything had to go through Teletoon and go from there. But I had a pretty good idea because obviously we'd been working on this. I was mainly doing Zero Man, but we had a few shows that we had in production at the same time. So I look at this character and I'm like, okay, well, what I knew enough because I had sat in on a lot of the recording sessions that we had done for Hose Hounds and some of the other shows that we had done, Katie and Orby and a few others, right? So I'd seen Rick Jones and all those guys kind of do their voices, and of course I grew up listening to these guys, so I knew how to take direction because I'd watched Gerald do it. And what would happen is it was a fairly straightforward process. So Gerald would say, okay, well, I think this is a sort of a professorly type guy, and he's very kind of, he's the leader, and he is, he's sort of he's in charge. And I'm like, okay. So I think the voice I initially came up with was, hello, I'm Edgar Bigglebore, and I forget what, no, I do remember what the line was, because the line was, I'm Edgar Bigglebore, I'm Edgar Bigglebore, I'm the head of the Teddies, and my job is to keep the rest of the Teddies in line. And my voice was sort of a late 50s, early 60s, not quite retired, high school principal type, professorial type, so sort of somewhere in that, because I wanted to play it safe, because I wasn't sure, and because I knew that Gerald would kind of say, make him older, make him younger, and I would get some direction, right? Because that's what a good voice director does. So I went and I did, hello, I'm Edgar Bigelow. I'm Edgar. It's a stupid echo. Hello, I'm Edgar Bigelow. I'm the head of the teddies, and my job is to keep the rest of the teddies in line. So I kind of did this. I didn't quite go as far as Dumbledore, that kind of thing, but that John Hurt-esque feel. But that was sort of how I started with it. And Gerald turns around to me and he says, well, I like that. That's really good. Can you make him older? And I said, okay, Gerald, how much older? And he said, maybe give him 10, 15 years. So this is a tenured professor type. He's sort of old school English, not quite English, but that kind of essence. So my grandparents are as British as the day is long. They both had accents, since my uncle still has an accent. Almost all of my family on my dad's side were born in England. So I grew up with accents in my family. My brother and I don't have one because we were both born. We were both born here in Canada. So I didn't have that accent. But I certainly grew up with it, and we certainly had tea and stuff at 4 o'clock and marmalade and treacle and all that, and penguin cookies and all that kind of stuff. So for all intents and purposes, my dad was like, oh, we're not we're not Canadian. We're not English. We're Canadian. It's like, yeah, Dad. So why is it that at 4 o'clock we always have, tea and confectionaries and whatnot? Well, yeah, that's what I figured. Anyway, so I was like, okay, well, I can do that professorial type thing. So 15 years older, okay, fine. That's no problem. But I did it at the same speed, right? Because what you do when you're doing voiceover work is you wait for instruction. I mean, you want to add something that you can add to it, but then you wait for direction, and then you add, right? And that's generally what happens with a good voice director. So what I did, so I said, okay, I can do that. So I went, hello, I'm Edgar Bigelow. I'm the head of the teddies, and I'm here to keep the other teddies in line. And the first thing that Gerald said is, that's good. Make your voice a little higher and a little bit more strained. And I want you to do two things if you can remember this, Corey. After he says, I keep the rest of the teddies, take a slight beat and put a sniff, like a sort of aristocratic kind of sniff, and then finish the line, which is in line. So I'm the head of the teddies, and I keep the rest of the teddies, beat, sniff, slight beat, in line. So just make them more strained and kind of stretch it out. And it became, hello, I'm Edgar Bigelow. I'm the head of the teddies, and I keep the rest of the teddies in line. And he's like, that's it. That's exactly. Can you do any other voices? Could you do an Irishman? Okay, well, my mom's Irish. I can probably. Well, you know what? I don't think. If you don't like it, you can kiss my Irish. You can kiss my Irish. You can kiss my Blarney Stone. And if he was singing for shit, he wouldn't get a smile. If he was singing for shit, he wouldn't get a smile. It's almost as if and he's like, oh, that's great. Can you do any others? Well, I don't know, Gerald. What kind of voices do you want? Well, could you do like this sort of New York? I'm like, okay, well, what kind of New York? Are we talking upstate, or are we talking this sort of Italian Brooklynese construction worker? And he goes, yeah, something like that now. And I thought, okay, well, yeah,
this sort of not quite Oscar the Grouch. I put a little bit of upstate in there, right? Because in upstate, they don't say coffee, they say coffee. So I didn't want him to quite be New Jersey, and I didn't, or Jersey, and I didn't want him to be too New York, and I didn't want to. So what I did is I said, all right, so you bring the voice down here. You bring the voice down here, and you say, do you want a cup of coffee? You got a problem with the coffee, right? Because in upstate New York, like in Syracuse and that, it's not. They, cool. So it's almost this kind of New Jersey sort of thing, but not too much. So what I did is I kind of took a 60% stereotypical-esque kind of thing going on. New York City, Brooklynese, Italian, like this sort of thing that George Carlin would do. The country's going down the tubes. What tubes? What tubes? What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. You come in here and you waste my time with all this garbage. This garbage. I came in and I wanted a fucking cup of fucking coffee. I don't want coffee. I don't want coffee. I don't want coffee. I want coffee. I want my good upstate New York cup of coffee. Coffee. You get it? You want upstate cup of coffee. Tastes like water. Tastes like whoever the last 20 women I dated. But I don't want coffee. I don't want coffee. I want coffee. So he was just laughing. And he's like, you got to do this. You got to, he was like, you got to do this voice. You got to do voiceovers like you're meant to do it. And I really felt uncomfortable, which was really stupid. It was really stupid. I don't know why I didn't. And I don't know why it was just dumb. But I didn't want to let him down because they, Gerald and a lot of the Amber guys were mentors to me, and they were very good to me. And there was another girl that I work with, Kenya Penna, and she was fantastic. And obviously, she didn't do Edgar Bigglebore, but she did a few other characters that needed to be cast. And Kenya did it. So she played a few characters in The Secret World of Benjamin Bear, and she did I forget what, but she'd done some other shows on YTV, which was sort of the Canadian equivalent of Nickelodeon. So that was so I felt good about that. And there were a few other times that Gerald reached out to me and I didn't feel comfortable with it, and it was just stupid. And that was it. I didn't do any voiceover stuff for a long time. I just figured, you know what, I'm an animator. I should probably stick to that. But every time we did a commercial or something, and I would voice direct a lot. And I didn't really give any thought about it for a long time. And I missed it a little bit, but I didn't really give any thought into it. And of course, I grew up watching Inuyasha and all these shows too, right, on Saturday morning or whatever, or before school, right, and that sort of thing. So that wasn't really a big, that was kind of nice, but yeah. So fast forward to maybe a little over a year ago. So a lot of you might know, if you don't know the name, you will definitely know the voice. So Red Pepper. So I've worked with Red Pepper. Red Pepper and I are friendly, and we've worked on a few projects together. Some projects. So he did some stuff for me for the Rattlers, the Saskatchewan Rattlers, but he's sort of the inner world, So he kind of took up the mantle for Don Fontaine. So Don Fontaine in the 80s and early to mid 90s was the voiceover, the trailer guy. So he voiced every single trailer that you would hear, pretty much, in Hollywood. And then when Don passed away, then Red kind of took over the voice of God thing. So Red and I get along really well, and we've worked together on some stuff. And again, we did the session and I directed him, and like voice direction for the commercial, and he did it, and he knocked the ball out of the park, as he always does, because he's red and he's awesome. He's also a fantastic gentleman in every sense of the word. And we started talking about voice acting, because he's like, Corey, you're really, really clear. You're really clear with your direction, which is really nice, because not every director is clear. And anyway, we were talking because, we were friendly. And I kind of told him the story, and I was goofing around and making voices, and his eyes lit up. He's like, Corey, you gotta find a way to get back into this, because I don't say this lightly, but you are very good at it. You obviously can direct, so you know what it's like on the other side of the booth. So I'm telling you, you have to do this. You gotta find a way to do this, because you've got it. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm sort of in a weird position, because I run a production company and I run an ad agency, and consequently I do a fair amount of voice direction. I do some animation, but most of my contacts in that world have sort of moved on. So it's like, okay, so I'm a producer with a show on TV, not an animated show, but a show like a, live action show, Go Nitro, which runs in syndication. But it's a weird position, right? Because I'm usually the one that's hiring, but voice acting is its own thing. So I have the experience where it counts in terms of direction and my background in animation production for television, and I'm used to looping and ADR and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is don't have an agent, don't have a, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like getting back into it when all your old bandmates are dead. So it's like, well, what the hell am I going to do? Now, there's sort of an interesting parallel. And you know how they say that everything in life is sort of 5 or, like 3 or 5 connections away or something like that? Well, there's a lot of animation work done in Canada. So in the days of Inuyasha and the early days of Dragon Ball and the Funimation dubs, Funimation did not used to do their own in-house dubs. They actually used to be done in Canada, in Vancouver, Vancouver. God, this echo. And it was done at Ocean Studios under contract to Funimation. So at the time, they had a few shows, right? They had license agreements with major Japanese studios like Sunrise, TMS, Toei, and the like. So, they didn't have dozens and dozens of titles at that time, right? They were very successful niche, but they didn't have the kind of, shall we say, sausage factory kind of need to get it out really quickly but keep the quality consistent. So when you've got 1 or 2 shows or even 5 or 6 shows doing those dubs, it's not that big of a deal. But once Funimation got a lot bigger and they kind of swallowed up Crunchyroll, and then Sony Pictures ended up kind of swallowing them up, and they started doing lots and lots of A-list titles as opposed to just a couple. Sourcing everything out to Vancouver was, it was a pretty big proposition and very expensive. So Funimation ended up, Funimation is in Fort Worth, Texas, so just out of Dallas. And so they do a lot of their in-house stuff, and then they have 2 or 3 local studios in Fort, well, probably more than 2 or 3, but they have a number of selected ADR recording studios that they contract that they trust to do the ADR dubs. So that's sort of how they do it. But now with COVID, a lot of the stuff is done remote. So if I have to go to the US and go to Fort Worth, that's not a big deal. My cousin lives in Fort Worth, and obviously Go Nitro, we shoot, wherever possible in the United States. And then, so this is nothing new to me, but it can be done remotely. So I'd kind of kept Red's comments on the voiceover in my regard in the back of my head. It never really went away, but I didn't really have an outlet. And my producer, so those of you that know, I study 2 martial arts, like myself. Like I'm a serious practitioner, student of 2. Well, one's technically not a martial art, it borrows, but it's like a fighting system. So one that I'm really serious with is Krav Maga, which I've been studying for a while. And the other martial art that I study very seriously is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And my sensei trained under Jason Gagnon. So he's a ranking black belt, and he also received his black belt directly from Cobrinha. So Cobrinha, any of you that follow Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu know how high up he is. So my dojo is directly has a direct lineage to Cobrinha, and Cobrinha is often, does stuff with our dojo directly, and he'll talk to us, and we'll fly down there and do workshops and stuff with him. And anybody that gets to black belt, brown black belt, usually will wind up being flown down. They'll fly down and, do stuff with Cobrinha. So the dojo that I train at is a very high level of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So if you get, because of the association and the way that it's taught. Anyway, I was sort of banged up, and I had a week off because I fucked up my chest. I can't remember what it was. I think we were doing like, we weren't going in a side control. We were working on, I think, some submissions, and somebody got an arm bar, and I was able to kind of deal with that. And then what ended up happening is I got a knee in my chest, and I had sort of a deep tissue bruise. So I was off for a week. So I was kind of laid up, which can happen and does happen in jiu-jitsu when you're kind of going at it. Nobody means to. There's just sort of an occupational hazard of martial arts. Sometimes you're going to get hurt. So I was laid up for a week. And what are you going to do for a week when you can't fucking move other than to watch TV and play video games? At least to me, anyway. So I figure I'm active enough. And what am I supposed to do? I can't go out, train, can't run, can't really do anything because my whole chest hurts, and I couldn't really do anything for a week. So my producer came over. She said, well, it's kind of I know you haven't watched anime or whatever in a while, but why don't I watched this years ago, and you might like it. It's called Kenichi, the Mightiest Disciple, or the World's Mightiest Disciple. I was like, okay, what the hell? I'll watch it. I got nothing better to do. I'm fucked anyway. So we started binge watching the Kenichi, and it was an English dub, and it really struck me how good the dub was, and I was very pleased with the characterizations. And that kind of glimmer kind of went on in the back of my head, And because I'd done some versioning and dubbing, and I speak two languages fluently, English and French. And anybody that's ever tried to translate anything from one language to another, it's not easy. And then on top of that, you also have to kind of make it work to sort of fit the flaps if you're versioning from a production that originates in another language. So that's a tall order. So you have to be able to come up with natural dialogue. You have to translate it first in a literal sense. And then you actually have to take that translation and then write a creative script based on that with words that sound natural in the culture of the language that you're adapting it to, while having it fit the mouth movements. And I don't think that people fully appreciate how difficult this is. And I was watching Kenichi, and I was very, very pleased and impressed with how good the dub and the ADR script was. And it was done really brilliantly. And I'm like, yeah, I wonder who did this. And at the end, I was like, oh, this is a Funimation dub. Funimation, jeez, okay, wow, they were always pretty good, but they had clearly stepped up their game. Now, it was an older show. It was like 2009 or something like that. But it kind of was like, you know what? I'll see if they're online and what they're doing. This shows you how out of it I was. Because when I was in college, we were all in anime, and the amounts of money we spent on manga and new type, and it was just obscene. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess when you're in college, you don't. But anyway, I sort of looked at this, and I thought, oh. So I looked it up, and most of the cast was online. And, from my experience in animation, as long as you're not some irritating fanboy that's like, oh my God, please do a line. I want you to do a line. I want you to have my babies, and I've seen you in every tentacle porn that you've ever been in that was version from Japan. So as long as you kind of have a professional, this fucking echo. A professional bass line, which is more than I can say for the audio. People are pretty easy to talk to. So I had gotten in touch with a few people, including Chris Rager. So those of you that know Chris Rager, he's known for a bunch of roles, but you will probably know him best as Mr. Satan or Hercule from Dragon Ball Z. And he had sort of a networking, and he has a workshop, like a voice workshop. So I called Chris up at his number, and we sort of shot the shit for a while. And he said, yeah, so this makes perfect sense, give it a go. This is the course, and we'll go through it. Good way to network, good way to get back into it, and it'll be fun. And I was like, sure, why the hell not? Now, in the past, it was done in Fort Worth in person, but with COVID, it's just not realistically possible. So it's actually being done through Zoom. Source Connect, which is sort of the replaced, I guess, ISDN now. So back in the day, we used to use ISDN, like ISDN equipped studios, so that you could kind of connect through an interface and do it remotely. But now there's a software, it's called Source Connect, and it allows the recording studio to hear you as if you were there over a high-speed internet, but you can do it remotely. So as long as you have a proper setup, then you're good. And then you just set up a camera, and then just so that you can be seen on Zoom, and then it's done that way. But to do that, you have to have an audio interface, which of course I have, and then have a proper microphone, which of course I have, which is why you've got this, big fucking thing in my face, and a light so that I can be seen and that you don't get choppy frame rates or whatever, right? So to try to replicate as much as possible the experience to do it. But it's just being done virtually, that's all. So that's kind of how we are doing it. So I'm doing it on the 22nd and 24th, which, as cool as it is, it kind of sucks because it means that's when I do jiu-jitsu. I do jiu-jitsu on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I told my sensei, yeah, you know what, those 2 days, so I'll have to go on Wednesday and probably Saturday. But that's okay. It's no big deal. But it'll be lots of fun. So that's why I kind of have this sort of fucked up setup here. So I have the microphone. So I'm kind of using this, right, so that I can be seen and testing the audio interface. But then once the workshop's done, I'm going to do my live streams the way I always have. So, but until Friday, you're going to see my daily live streams here. So I don't have the nice graphic, and I don't have the, I might be able to get a sort of a text overlay tomorrow for those of you that like to comment when I'm doing a live stream, because I always like to hear what you need to say and what you want to say. I really enjoy it. But for the next couple of days, I'm going to have this shitty background. It's the same room. I just don't have, right now I'm standing up. You can't see my face because I'm speaking in the microphone through the interface for the live cast. So, but at least the audio quality is good. You can hear me and I can communicate with you. So what I'll do is the other thing that I'll do is I'll talk to Chris. I might tape some of it for my own personal use, and then I'll ask if I have permission to post little bits and pieces of it. I definitely will not be able to put any of the Japanese English dub stuff footage, because that's under the license for private use only, right? Because it's copyright. So I don't even know what show we're dubbing for the workshop. So that I won't be able to show. So I won't be able to show you any visuals of whatever anime that we're dubbing. But what I might be able to show you is just sort of clips of me sort of doing it with some of the other classmates, and maybe do a little promo thing. Like, again, I'll have to ask, but then it'll kind of give you an idea of what voice actors do and the world that I used to be in, and see me kind of slip back into it, because I like to put kind of cool stuff on the channel. And the other thing too is it might, and if it's something that you like, heck, you might want to join Chris's class too. So anyway, I'll ask, once we get sort of close to done with it or get going or whatever. But yeah, so that's a little story of why I have the setup the way it is here right now. And that's why it sounds and, well, it looks like I have an ice cream cone in my face that's black. Right? Because if I move over here, for example, you can't hear me as well. And if I move over here, you also can't hear me that well. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, the deal with this. So it is what it is, and that's okay, right? But yeah, but that's what I'm working on right now, and that is why everything is set up like this. So yeah, I hadn't been on in a couple of days, but now that life is getting a little bit more normal, such as it is, but if you can put up with the way that I have this right now, this is the way I'm going to be for at least a couple of days. And then it'll be back to the normal setup. But until I get some more XLR cables and splitters and whatever so that I can have everything running, right? Because I'll probably be doing a lot of voiceover work, right? So I don't really want to have to rip everything apart all the time because it's annoying. And then you have to go and troubleshoot and put everything back the way it was and all that kind of stuff. But it's pretty good. Fairly low noise. I mean, obviously there's a bit of an echo because it's OBS and I'm close with my headphones and I don't have a canceling loop, but that won't be the case for the recording sessions. But yeah, so that's pretty much where we're at. So anyway, I think that pretty much kind of covers it, I would say. So yeah, so until next time, which most likely is going to be tomorrow, yeah, if you are not a subscriber to my YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button in the lower right hand corner. Please subscribe. I really enjoy seeing your comments. I really want to hear what you have to say. And anything that's interesting that I'm doing, I'm going to try and post here. So until then, have a great night. And I will see you, as I say, most likely tomorrow. But as a consequence of not using the device that I normally use, you're not going to get a nice intro, outro, at least tonight, as you've seen. So I'm going to have to go to the computer and stop the stream. But like I say, we'll go back to the normal one in a bit. So yeah, have a good one, and I will see you probably tomorrow.